What's up, y'all? You are watching the Lorraine Lindsay podcast show, another episode of The Mindsetters, where we believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. And today we're going to be talking more on relationships. How do you know when it's time to let someone you love go? But before we get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Give us the thumbs up. Send us your comments. We love to hear from you. And so thank you. So we're here. I have a returning guest, Mr. Rodney Allgood. Hey, Rodney. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Always a pleasure.
Love your insight. And I had to have you back, especially for this topic, because I know, first of all, you can give us a male's perspective on these bullets. And then also, I just love that you always have this level-headed, very perspective way to give the audience the nuggets that they need when we're talking about subjects. So thank you for coming back again. And then, of course, my lovely co-host, Miss Carmen Smith. Miss Realtor here in Las Vegas. So we're just going to jump right into it. We're not even going to drag out intros or anything. We're just going to get right into the topic. So you recently, Carmen, sent me an article from Time Life. And the article was how to know when it's time to let go of someone you love. And I think this is a great topic because we are in our relationship series. And I think it's a good thing because we were talking about patterns earlier and other things. And so now it's like, well, what is it? When is it time to pull the plug? When is the lifeline of the relationship truly, truly over? Because I think sometimes people prematurely end relationships. And then there's also times when you just kind of hang on for too long. So there's a couple bullet points, and I'm going to start with the first one. We're just going to go right into it today. And then I would love to hear you guys obviously chime in on these bullets. So in the article, one of the first bullet points that says to you, maybe it's time to pull the plug on this relationship is that your needs aren't being met. What do you think? So, you know what I should probably, I'm going to read a little bit on the paragraph. It says, every person has different requirements that need to be met in a relationship, according to Wadley, who's the author.
Okay.
And he says these needs can be emotional, like wanting quality time with your partner, or functional, like requiring them to contemplate money management. So you guys want to kind of tap into what it means when you say your needs are not being met and when to know when it's time to say, okay, it's time to go.
I think I'm always saying to make a successful relationship, and this is just me, my thoughts, find out what your needs and wants are from the other person and just do them. I think it's that simple. So whatever my needs could be financial, they could be emotional. I think we all have emotional, financial needs. But what does that mean to me? What does my financial needs mean to me? So that might mean I need a man to meet me where I'm at financially or above. And I just think those are discussions that should be had in the beginning of a relationship. And I don't think that we are clear in what our needs are in our relationships from the beginning. And what it means to be emotionally connected to me, what that looks like for me, and vice versa with my partner, and how we meet in the middle with those needs. And if they're not explained in the beginning, I don't know what I'm signing up for. So you might have PTSD and you don't share it with me, and then I'm signing up for it and I don't even know I'm signing up for it.
But what happens though in a relationship when, let's say we have the cognitive ability to understand that we know what those needs are and how to articulate what those needs are. But for some people, sometimes you get into a relationship not knowing that certain things are your needs. So I guess the thing is let's say you use something like PTSD, which is kind of a big deal, right? But what if a person didn't know they had that? At what point in the stage of that relationship, if those needs weren't articulated from the beginning and that they start to kind of come up, do you finally say, okay, it's time to go here? Rodney?
I think it's all about communication, right? If there's no communication, you have no hope. So to be able to articulate what it is you need, and for a person to be a good listener, for yourself to be a good listener, right? Because relationships should be reciprocal. It's all about communication. When people can't communicate, there's a problem. And many times people just expect you to know, just somehow by osmosis, figure out what you need. And it doesn't work like that. I think a lot of times people think everyone should see the world the way they see it. And it should be obvious. But it's not obvious. People have different backgrounds. People have different levels of needing different things, right? And sometimes you just can't fill a 55-gallon drum up with a 5-gallon pail. Sometimes that's all someone has to give. And when it's like that, then you might consider if this is a relationship that needs to end. Sometimes people don't have the capacity for certain things. Or can you focus on the things that that person does bring? No one brings everything.
Mm-hmm.
There is some compromise in a relationship, but it's all about communication and what you can and cannot deal with. Some things you
Yeah.
can accept not having what you want
Mm-hmm.
because it's replaced by something else that they do. Other things aren't like that.
I think that if we are talking about when to end it, when your needs are not being met, I think when it's not reciprocated from the other person and they're willing to both of us find a compromise in our needs being met, I think that's when it's time to end it in that case.
I also think too, to kind of to that point, when your needs are not being met when it's been communicated, right? And I
Mhm.
think to your point, Rodney, because that's exactly what you said, that communication is key. And often people will accept certain things in the beginning of a relationship and then later decide that it's unacceptable, but they've never really communicated to their partner and then they're ready to go. So to your point, it's like, what are my needs? How do my needs change? Because that's another
Mm-hmm.
thing. Am I being fair to my partner to say, okay, my needs may have changed as this relationship has, it's gone out. My life has changed because we're evolving. And are those needs being met? And am I articulating am I giving the person a fair opportunity to meet the needs without it being selfish, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You were going to say something, Rodney?
It's also understanding each other's love languages.
Right.
Because someone might be expressing something in their way, thinking they're doing a very good job of it. When I was married, um, I'll give you an example. My father was rather controlling over my mother. And I thought that if I gave my wife all the freedom in the world, she'd love it because my mom wanted more freedom.
Mm.
So I gave my wife a whole bunch of freedom. You didn't have to ask me to spend something, to buy something. Do what you need. For her, that meant I didn't care,
Mm.
Ah, interesting.
right? So I was just communicating things the wrong way.
Interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, that's good. Because I'm thinking about in my own personal experiences about as we go through the questions, like what were needs that weren't being met for me, where it's finally like, okay, I have to pull the plug here. Um, and the thing that's hard about that, I think sometimes, is that when you have a need that's not being met, but you bend continuously
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of empty promises, and sometimes there's, the makeup, the breakups, like we talked about this last week with the push and pull type of relationship where you're bending and you're hoping and you're bending and you're hoping, but it's like, how many times does that have to happen for you to finally say, you know what, my needs are just not being met here. I've communicated. So I think this would answer the question. I have communicated what my needs are. I am understanding what their needs are. I'm trying to give them what they need, but they're not reciprocating it like we talked
Mm-hmm.
about. And at some point, you have to stop lying to yourself
Yeah.
that that's going to change. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next bullet point, which is uh, now, okay, so your needs are not being met, and now you're seeking those needs from others. So I'll read a little bit again. It says, when you get promoted at work or you're faced with a family emergency, who is the first person you want to tell? In a fulfilling, healthy relationship, the answer to those questions should be your partner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting because sometimes we think that the needs being fulfilled by someone else means adultery or you're cheating or something like that. Sometimes it's emotional need.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you feel like you don't have your partner that you can communicate with, and so you find yourself saying, you know what, I rather call my friend and talk to my friend about it. She's more fulfilling in my need than this person. That can create some distance.
Man, I lived that. Toward the end of my marriage, our communication was so bad, and almost anything of any serious nature ended up in an argument. So, yeah, I started talking to other people about things that I couldn't communicate with my wife about, and I created more problems with that. But definitely that happens because people feel really good when they are heard.
Yeah.
Right.
And I just wanted to be seen and I wanted to be heard. And we were just missing each other on that point. And it's an inner hell if you can't get stuff out. When you're pushing everything down, when you're living to avoid conflict and arguments, it's not fun. And it's very easy to end up speaking to other people. When I was having marriage therapy, a counselor, he told me this. At one point, he said, Rodney, you're like a loose wire, and you're in a dangerous zone. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, if you meet the right person right now, it will be like a man dying of thirst in the desert on
Wow.
the tallest glass of water. And you need to make a decision about your relationship right now, because it's not a matter of if,
It's
It's
when.
matter
it's a
when.
matter of when, because you're so unfulfilled in this area. That person will be irresistible to you if that person meets
That's
the
pretty
needs.
deep. And man, that's a whole
That's
can of worms in and of itself when
Mm.
we talk about infidelities and cheating and the reasons why, which is actually an episode that I want to do, is why do men cheat versus women? I think it'll be a good topic. But you were going to say something too, Carmen. Uh-oh. That laugh means she don't want to get in trouble for what she's about to say, y'all.
Is that what it means?
Yeah,
You know
you're
me
like,
so well. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it. Yes. I'm stuck. I'll pass.
You're going to pass? Okay.
I agree with everything Rodney said.
No,
though.
but it is true.
Yeah, I
I
agree
think,
with
and
all
I
that.
think that people, it's that saying. I've been saying it a lot lately for some
Mm-hmm.
reason, but it's that whole thing of saying my God, my brain. The weekend was too much for me. It's not the symptoms that you're showing that are showing up in your relationship is really not the problem. And a lot of times people will focus on the symptoms. So he cheated or she cheated and they went with this other person. It's like, but that's a symptom to a problem. You know, and how do you get there? Now, mind you, there are some people who that's just their issue. But you
Mhm.
knew that. We know
Yeah.
even that, you know what I mean? But I'm talking about if it ends up going down that rabbit hole, that's a symptom to a problem.
And it could be other void fillers too, not just infidelity.
Not just
It
infidelity.
could be gambling or alcohol, or people will find whatever makes them feel good.
Right.
So
Well,
because we all want that
people want to
feeling.
connect to something,
Yeah.
and it's important to be able to communicate that to your partner. This almost everything we're talking about,
Mm.
it's probably going to go back to communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? One thing to remember is that we can only change people so much. The bigger thing is figuring out what we can and cannot live with.
You know, this is exactly in my last relationship. Okay. And I always bring it up because it's obviously my most recent. I'm not trying to like beat a dead horse here, but it's just relevant to my life and these topics. But one of the things that I had to decide when I made the decision to finally pull the plug for the last time, because there was a lot of like, again, push and pull, on again, off again, on again for both of us. And at the end, I had to ask myself this question. Let me assume that everything about this person is going to stay the same, good and bad, good and bad. But the things that always bring us to this point of contention, I have to say to myself, nothing about this individual is ever going to change.
Mhm.
And can I live with that? And it's a hard question to answer because the good side and the beautiful side of that person allows you to see all the potential, especially when you have so many good times together. You kind of want to relish in those moments and use those as rationalization to not leave. But when I really had to ask myself the question, these things that keep coming up, that I keep saying are deal breakers, he can't see that they're deal breakers because I keep going back. And so I'm either going to stay with him and say, this is who he is, and I accept that, or I'm going to say, that is who he is and I still accept it, but not for my life. And that's hard to do,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when you love somebody, but it's necessary for your own peace of mind.
Yeah.
Well, the beautiful thing is you didn't make him wrong. And a lot of times,
He wouldn't think that, but you're right, I
well,
didn't.
you know, people are just different. And sometimes things work for a season and it stops working. Sometimes things served a purpose and then you've moved on.
So interestingly enough, I'm in the process of moving and things like that. And so there was a book and the book had some notes that I had written in the book and had completely forgot about. I don't even know how long these notes were in there, but the notes were pertaining to my relationship that I was in. And there was me measuring pros and cons and me questioning myself and all kinds of things. It was, very personable and things like that. And you know what hit me when I read that? This was just today. I was like, oh my goodness, everything that I'm reading about the pros and cons, the ups and downs, everything I was struggling, I can't pinpoint the time frame when I wrote this letter. And the reason why I couldn't pinpoint it is because it was so consistently a problem in our relationship that it could have been any day, any week, any year. It was always the same thing. So as we talk about when's it time to pull the plug, you still, even it's, been several months, there's always some lingering thoughts. Sometimes like, did I make the right decision? Should I pick the devil I know versus the devil I don't know? You ask all yourself all those questions, and then you get those the reaffirming things that say, no, these were real problems. And I'm pretty sure he has his list. I'm not trying to act like, I was the angel and he was the devil, because that's not the case. But it was just reassurance. It was that reassurance of my decision by reading that kind of stuff and saying, wow, it was necessary for the plug to get pulled. Unfortunately, no one, it's breaking up sucks. So,
Yeah.
All right. So next bullet point, your friends and family don't support your relationship.
I've definitely
How
had
do you
that.
know? Because here's the thing with this one, right? First of all, you have to like, for me, sometimes depending on who your friends and family are, right? Are they supportive of you from the beginning? Because sometimes you can have friends and family who just don't want to see you in a relationship because they feel like it's going to take away from their relationship with you. And so they can be selfish and they could pick on every little thing. Like I've had times in relationships where I had a friend, for example, and this is many moons ago. And normally you just vent to your friends about your relationship. Man, she would hold him hostage. Every little thing I complained about because she didn't like the fact that I spent more time with him. So then she would always make sure she would reiterate, remember he did this. And I was like, well, that was just like an argument. So I guess my point is, when do you know when it's time to pull the plug when your friends and family are not supporting the relationship any longer? Who wants to go on that one?
I've had where my family didn't like who I was dating, and it was it wasn't a long relationship, but I think at least I know, the people that are giving me advice are people that I trust. There's only a certain amount of people that I would even take into consideration what they say. I never have ended a relationship based on that, but they saw the red flags that I should have seen. And sometimes, especially like my mom, just people that are really close to me and know I deserve better or should have better. You got to listen to it sometimes.
You know how I know when it's time to pull the plug? When the friends and family are not supporting? Because this is how the tone goes. In the beginning, when we were breaking up, oh, I just want you guys to be happy. Oh my God, I love you two together. It goes from that conversation, especially I'm notorious for the push and pull relationship, on again, off again. So you get that from the friends and family. I love him. I love you. I love you too. You guys will figure it out. And it's very enthusiastic. It goes from that to, at the end of the day, Lorraine, I love you. And I'm going to support whatever decision you make.
Yeah,
and when it turns into
happy.
that, I just want you to be happy. And there's that side. Then I start to realize everybody's over it and they're seeing it. And sometimes you just have to go through it to make the decision for yourself. But what do you think, Rodney?
Number one, I think that's something we have to be careful of. Life in general, you have to pick the people you validate.
Right.
You can't listen to everybody's opinion. And there are certain people who are very slow to talk that will ask you a lot of questions and base their opinion based on solid things, not just an opinion and how they feel about someone. There are some people that are an acquired taste, right? We all have friends.
I think I'm an acquired taste person.
We all have friends that rubbed us wrong when we first met them, and then we got to know them, and wow, this person is so loyal. This is such a good, solid person. But they might be obnoxious. They might joke a lot and say inappropriate things, or their exterior might not be so attractive to people when they first know them. I know a few people like that. And you get to know them, and you're like, wow, this is a solid person. So listening to everybody's opinion can really throw you off.
Right.
Because, again, it takes a while to really get to know that person, to know they're actually a good person. And sometimes you're in a relationship and you really know them. When I was in school, I had this friend named Tim. And Tim was such a punk. I mean, he was just, I understood why people didn't like Tim. But he was my best friend because I knew him differently. I knew the softer side of him, and he's a great guy, and he's become a really great guy as he grew up. But again, I understood that, and relationships can be like that too, where you know a different side of someone than everybody else does. And that's why it's really important to watch who you speak to about your
Right.
problems in your
Mm-hmm.
relationship, because they are there to support you. I remember one time I saw on Facebook someone, and they're not on my Facebook list anymore, so they won't see this, but um, their husband was at a conference, and he was a big leader at this conference. And when you go to those conferences, you shake hands and you hug a bunch of people. And there was some lipstick on his collar when he got back to his room. And I know how that is because I've been in that position before. And she went on Facebook and told everybody.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
She
Now, what are you
she
going to
jumped
do?
to
But she
conclusions.
jumped to conclusion and told everybody on Facebook.
Hmm.
What do you do when your man does this and that?
Oh,
Right. Now, suddenly, none of your friends like him. Now you're
right.
going to try to repair that later on. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and you can't undo that. And that's a big example, but that happens a
No, but
lot of
that's a
times.
relevant
Yeah.
example because a lot of people do, this, especially with social media. They get in their feelings
Hmm.
and they go on and they blast
Right,
their entire life story about everything that's happened
right,
in that relationship. And I get sometimes they're looking for all this reassurance and whatever they need to get out of that. They need to pull in a tribe, but it's like you're getting everybody who doesn't,
right,
like you said, these are not people you've validated in your life. And then when you decide to get back, and then you want to, literally, there's a woman that I know where same thing. She was like, her and her husband, I think they're exes now. It was just constantly going in about things they were going through, and she was hurt, and he was doing a lot. But then she decided to reconcile with him, and there were literally people commenting like, "Really?" And
right,
and it was painful for her to have to go through that
right.
experience. And then she realized, okay, I gotta keep that kind of stuff private.
Yeah, I don't
You
like
Sometimes,
know,
any.
sometimes they try to be ambiguous, right? They don't say that it's their problem, but it's like, what do you do when your man, blah, 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 blah. And
right?
everybody knows what you're talking about, right? And how do you repair that after you've
Got
turned
it.
all your friends against them?
Yeah, and you know what? For me, and I've done it. I've not blast details and very explicit about my relationship, but I remember when I wanted to end it this time, I actually said, unfortunately, me and this person are no longer together. It was a great, and I sent this nice, diplomatic message out there. And I remember my mom, I think it was like, why would you put that message on Facebook? And I was like, because I really need to pull the plug. And I know if I put it out there that I'll think twice about going back. It was like I wasn't really doing it for everybody to know. I was doing it for myself. But then it was me ending an engagement, and then next thing you know,
We're-
you see him in the background in pictures. So I was like, all right, Larry, nix that.
would you do that different, or would you still
I
do it?
think yes, and yeah, I think I would maybe. I feel like I want to be transparent, but I want to do it in a way that is mindful of the other person as well. But for me, my Facebook is, I don't need to be so much of an open book, but I do like to share because I put a lot of positive stuff on my Facebook, right? I'm doing motivational stuff or I'm traveling all over the place. But I also want people to know that I'm also human and I have things that I go through and that I'm only sharing not to be boisterous, but it's because I feel like trying to share positivity. I'm rambling. So whatever. But I don't know. I don't know if I would. I think the next time I get into a relationship, I definitely will handle it a lot more delicately.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a longer period of time, I'll keep it very private,
Private, yeah.
for a
I don't like
long
posting
time. Yeah,
relationship
I
stuff
won't. I won't.
on social media.
If they're significant to me, no one's going to know about that person until it's
Yeah,
time to know about that person.
yeah,
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go to the next bullet point. Um, you feel obligated to stay with your partner.
yeah.
Oof.
The time invested.
Right.
Well, the person I'm dating yesterday, we had a conversation, and he was talking about a woman, and he said, I don't need to go into detail of the story, but basically, like, he knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, so it was easy to let her go. And he just made the decision. And it's like, at this stage, we're all 40 plus, right? Um, we don't really have time to be wasting on things that aren't going to go anywhere. But younger, you might get into a relationship that lasts 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years. and you're just stuck in it. And the time you invest in it, it's like you don't want to lose that time, so you keep going through the stuff you've been through, because like you said, is it this devil better, or I don't know what you said.
Yeah, the
This
devil you know versus the devil you don't
yeah,
know.
like you keep the good things, and you're like, am I ever going to be able to replace these good things?
But
to
what
let
about
these
the
bad things-
obligation to the partner though? Like when is it time to pull the plug when you're feeling obligated? Because it's almost like you pity them, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of self-centered, really.
Yeah,
You're like,
and
what are they going to do without me? They need me.
when you said about being selfish, a lot of times we are selfish. It's always about what are my needs not met.
Right.
Do we consider the other person's needs?
Not when you're unhappy. When you're unhappy,
Right,
it's
you
about
don't.
you.
It is all about
Truly,
you.
unhappiness is, I have an idea of what happiness is,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not making that happen for
Right.
me. That's why people are unhappy, right?
Right, because you're looking for somebody else to make you happy.
So when is it time to pull the plug, Rodney? Because feeling obligated to be with someone is kind of like, to me, already a telltale that you should probably pull the plug if you're feeling obligated. But what's the fine line with that?
Well, I was there, right? And another layer to it is having kids.
Right. That's a big one, I think.
So I had 2 children. And how's this? I told my ex-wife I wanted to separate in 2003 on a Tuesday. And she tells me she's
On a
pregnant on a
Tuesday?
Friday.
Oh, man. Well, there's a week.
Okay. Yeah.
So what do you do? That's a hell
Imagine
of
that,
obligation right
right?
there.
So I stayed another 5 years
Wow.
just out of obligation because I can't leave a pregnant woman, right? My kids are 10 years apart. I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad
yeah.
she's here now. My daughter's awesome, but that's what happened, right? So I felt an obligation to her. I felt an obligation because I had a business that we ran together that employed 30 people.
Was she as happy too? Do you think she was so
No,
happy?
no, we were not happy.
Okay.
Okay, but we were also raised that through our religion that divorce is absolutely wrong.
So there's another
So
obligation.
that's another layer of that,
Right.
right? Just being programmed with
Yeah.
that thought that God does not accept a divorcing.
In my marriage, we went through counseling with our pastors. And at the point we were at, it made it worse because it's like, well, you shouldn't get a divorce, but I
Mhm.
feel like this.
Yeah,
And I was I feel like this. I have the right to feel how I feel.
right.
We needed clinical help. We didn't need, somebody to make us feel guilty about getting a
Right.
divorce.
So what's the fine line? What's the silver lining in this, right? Because sometimes the obligation to stay in the relationship forces you to kind of mend it and make it work. For some people, like financial obligation or, like you said, children. And sometimes, because the reality is, everyone's like, I just want to be happy. But who said you're going to be happy?
Forever.
Like, why is like that? You
The
don't.
love is the obligation too, though, because sometimes you still love that person.
Well, I don't think
You want
love is
them to be
an
okay.
I don't think love is an obligation. I think love is a choice. It's your abundance. You get to choose to love somebody. You're not obligated to love anybody.
I mean, like, I'll speak for myself.
Uh-huh.
Being married and getting a divorce, I still love my ex-husband. Like, we
Right.
still have love for each other. Love was never our issue. So I don't know if the right word was obligation, but you love it. You want to make sure they're okay. You wanted to make sure your wife was okay. So you're in it hoping you can make it work, but really it takes 2 people. If one person's not
For sure.
willing, it's not going to work.
And
then-
maybe
yeah.
maybe that's just real quick. And maybe that's how you know, because the whole content of the show is how do you know when it's time to pull the plug?
Yeah.
And maybe that's when you know. To your point, Carmen, is like, if I'm in the state where I'm feeling obligated, and again, what you said earlier, communication, and now I'm communicating to my partner that I'm feeling like I'm forced here. I'm not happy. What can we do? And the person says, you know what? I feel the same way, and I'm willing to work on it. Then maybe you could work through it. Maybe. But if one person's like
I'm just done.
not wanting to do the work, then as hard as it may be,
And one person may feel like they've already tried to do the work and they're just tired. Like for me, I was just tired. Like I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel like, things were changing. And I felt like I was walking up a mountain with a ton of bricks on my back and I just couldn't.
Mhm.
And I was tired.
you were going to say something, right? I'm sorry.
I think there's a
interrupted.
difference also between when you're dating someone and when you're in a marriage.
Mhm.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah,
a lot more commitment to a marriage I think with marriages, you do everything you possibly can to make it work because you did make a commitment to it,
Mm-hmm.
and you owe it to the other person to try as hard as you can before you pull the plug. In a relationship, it's a little bit different, right? Because when you're really grinding, well, you want to make yourself available for something that works better,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're
Yeah.
not married yet. You're not in that kind of commitment yet. So I think there's just another layer of commitment to a marriage.
That makes total sense. That actually really resonates with me. And I think that's in my relationship where I finally pulled the plug. It's because we had already taken the relationship to the next level, which was being engaged. And so now in my mind, it's like, I'm going to marry this person. And this is going to be, I've been married once before and I knew I shouldn't have married the person I married. And I said, I'm not going to ever do that again. So being engaged and knowing that I was ready for that next commitment and I was really ready and the problems were still there. To your point, for me, the decision was the next step for us is marriage. And if this is not still working after this many years, am I going to be unhappy in marriage?
Mhm.
And is it worth
Mhm.
that me doing that to either one of us if I know in my heart I'm not happy? So for me, that was one of the other factors that said, it's time to pull the plug here because that next level, I didn't feel it was going to work. So, were you going to make another point? Because I was going to move on to the next bullet, but I wanted you to
Go
finish
ahead.
your
It
thought.
might fit the
Okay.
next bullet.
The next bullet is you've been working on your relationship for more than a year. And let me read a little bit of it. It says, of course, when two people are in love and they have spent years together or have started a family together, there's a stronger incentive to work out the problems, which we kind of alluded to. And okay, so it says there's an author, Chrysler. Her advice is to seek couples counseling if both partners want the relationship to work, but she caveats that you should set a time limit of 1 year to work through things. So what do you all think about that?
My
know-
relationships after my marriage haven't lasted a year.
Well, then you know how to cut it, girl. You're like, pull the plug.
when I-
DNR orders, do not resuscitate. Code 3,
What's
let them
wrong
go.
with me? I don't know.
when I was married, we saw this one counselor for 2 years,
Okay.
and we were basically paying his mortgage because nothing was really changing, right? So we changed counselors, and he said, 2 years? You got 4 months with me.
Mm.
The end of 4 months, I'll tell you if this is going to work or not,
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
right?
That's straight up.
And that's what happened, right? I think a lot of times we change as people. You know, the person I was when I got married at 23, I look at pictures like a child.
Yeah.
Look at my wedding pictures. Who was that guy? I'm so different today.
Right.
Me and my ex would never have gotten together today. We're like miles apart, who we've become. So I think going into relationships, it's a reason, a season, or a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't.
All relationships.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
don't really know when we go into it. And when we lose the need to make someone wrong and just realize that we've changed, that we've grown differently, that the important things of life we see differently, see, that's when you're incompatible. There's a few really important things in life.
What do you think they are?
The meaning of life, why you're here. Religion is a big one, right? If someone's really committed to a religion, that was our problem. It could be just how you think it works and what your priorities and what's important to you.
Right.
So, some people might have a goal to accomplish something really big in the world, which means I'm going to share myself with a lot of the world. That's me. That's how I really feel. Someone else just wants a white picket fence and
That's
spend
so
all the time
true.
with our family, and this is all that matters. And that kind of person will not support a big dream. Somebody who has a big dream is out of alignment with somebody who
Mhm.
has a smaller kind of view of what makes them happy. Like when I look at my ex and her family, her mom and dad are all about their family, and they will do anything for people in that bubble. But if you're outside that bubble, it doesn't really matter for them.
Right.
And she grew up with that point of view. And here I am wanting to do things to touch the world, so it doesn't match up. But for a season, it may have, right? And you may have helped each other accomplish some things that helped your growth. But you have to realize and be honest with yourself if the two of you are just misaligned today.
Mhm.
Because what happens is someone's spirit will get crushed.
Right.
It's always one.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So moving forward, like if you're out of a relationship, moving forward, getting into new relationships, I think that's absolutely key is to, like I said, communicate your needs and wants from the beginning. If you know that you're not capable of being with the person who has these big dreams and you just want to be a housewife and you can't handle a man that's going to be gone for weeks at a time, don't sign up for it trying to change it about yourself. I think we make that mistake a lot
Yeah, I agree.
as people. Like my last relationship, when we were breaking up, and I'm like, you come to the table with this emotional issue. You really don't like me because you think I run my life like a business, and I'm signing up for it, and everything else you come with, and I'm signing. I'm like, pick me.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. It's never gonna work. So it was easy to say, it's not going to work. We're not aligned.
Right. And then there's also a fine line, right? When we're talking about who we are and what we want and what our needs are. And we, last week we were talking about, you picked your picker was off.
Yeah.
You're picking the wrong picker. And one of the things that I said on that episode was, but you also have to check in with your ticker, with your heart. Because sometimes if you've been hurt, if you've been in relationships that were damaging to you, you can have your needs built on your insecurities. And so then your needs become so strong because you're really pushing people out of your life and no one's going to be sufficient. The thing is, nobody's going to be perfect. They're going to have problems. So there's that fine line of saying, where for some people, it's not even when to pull the plug, is that they're always pulling the plug. It's like, nope. And their needs are, like I said, they're built on insecurities. So I think that sometimes we have to check in with ourselves too and say, because to your point, I mean, we've discussed some things where, Carmen had some very adamant things. I don't want a man like this. I don't want that. And I'm certain until she met somebody who may have compromised her don't wants. And she was so certain about
I
it.
was very certain.
But then what happened is I'm holding her hostage to what her don't wants are. And then I'm like, don't bend just because this person's a little bit more promising. She's like, but I'm allowed to change my mind. And I'm like, she's right. But we have to be clear on, and we can't draw a hard line in the sand sometimes with some of the things that we say that we need because we're trying to protect ourselves.
And there's different circumstances that allow you to compromise on some of the things that you said you didn't want. For me, I didn't want to date a man with small children because I like to travel. I like to go. But if the man can provide enough finances to make sure his kids are taken care of and I'm taken care of, then that's okay. But I had met a man that had small children. They were like 1 and 2. And I'm like, what I say, baby seats don't fit in my BMW. Like, that ain't even going to work. But he had them all the time. My kids are gone on the weekends. So that just didn't work for me. And that's the only reason why I didn't want to date somebody with small kids. So that's a compromising situation for me. Like, I was able to bend on that.
I say outside in versus inside out. Where are you in what you're compromising?
Yeah.
So when you look at a situation and say, this is what's in alignment with who I am. This is how I cross the T's and dot my I's in my life as it stands today. And if I'm being presented with another human being where there's a connection and some of what they represent is not in alignment with who I am, I have to ask and I'm now in a phase where I'm ready to compromise what I think is in alignment with me. I have to check in with where it's coming from, where the source is. If what you are promising me makes me change my mind, that's outside in and it's not real. And it will not be sustainable because that becomes an expectation and a burden you put on the person. But if something inside of me on my own organically, which means like in her example, if the person is financed, I can compromise because they have money. So my question is like, if their money is gone, if they go to level 0, bankrupt, they're done, would you still compromise that decision? Because if you're making the decision based on financial, then you're going to end up being miserable if this person goes broke, or you're going to have an expectation, or there's going to be some form of control and you can get yourself into something unhealthy. So I think we have to check in with, am I changing my mind because I want that so bad? Or am I changing it because I want that so bad? And there's a difference.
I think too with it's the person too. You know what I mean? It's not just the finances, but it's
No,
a
I'm
bigger
not talking
pic-
about.
No, I know,
I'm
but I
using
just
an
want to
example.
be clear. Like
Yeah.
when we're compromising, there's a lot of different reasons why we're compromising certain things. I don't want to be tied. But it's also a fear.
Right.
You know, I've been raising kids my whole life. I've been tied down. Like I'm finally free.
Do you think it's a fear, or is just that you're in your next chapter?
My next chapter.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a fear. I don't want to be tied down. Like
Right.
I don't want to be held down by anything.
I'm right where you're at, and that's something that would be on my list. But I think it's important to be able to write things in pencil and not pen,
Right.
right? Because my kids are grown, so it's easy to say, I don't want anybody with small children, right? But this person might be amazing.
Yeah.
And that
Right.
little 10-year-old is like the most amazing kid.
Yeah.
You're like, I wouldn't deal with anybody else's kid, but that kid
Mhm.
is
Right.
the coolest kid I've ever met in my life.
Well, hell, we're getting older.
Right.
We were like, I don't want
Right.
nobody with kids.
And-
Well,
No.
Can you take my grandkids?
But then you want to
So-
date
so-
younger people and
So
make them
what
with kids.
what I'm
or-
saying is that it should be in pencil, because there
Yeah.
are exceptions to the rule
Absolutely.
that you could take some things that you might not think you want,
Mhm.
and find yourself in situations that might work with that person.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a very individual kind of thing. You might meet somebody, most women want security, right? You want a man that does well financially. Well, somebody might be involved in something that is his life purpose that doesn't pay a lot of money.
Mhm.
Martin Luther King wasn't rich, right? So some people have a life purpose, and you might admire this man for what his calling is. He might change the world, and there's no real money in that. He might be doing something to help the youth of the community. And for that person, you might say, you know what? I can roll with that,
Mhm.
because this person's worth and his value is in something other than
Right.
the
Yeah.
dollar bill.
And I guess I'm sorry because I use money as an example,
No,
but
but
I
it's,
just,
it's a good example.
but I
Yeah.
just, it just I guess my whole point is like, we want to, and we're kind of getting off topic a little bit because I think the last bullet point was if you've been working on the relationship for more than a year. So we
got
kind
way
of,
off topic.
we got way off topic. So I'm going to kind of circle back a little
Okay.
bit. But just kind of like a little tidbit before I go to the next point is I do think that if you've been in a relationship for a specific time frame, and I'm only saying this because I'm being very candid with my own personal life and realizing this, not just my last relationship, but there's a pattern for me in sticking around longer than I know it should because of the same issues. It's one thing when new issues come up and you've gotten past certain things, but when it's literally when you're not progressing because you're stuck in like a broken record, and it just keeps looping back into the same cycle. At some point after a certain period of time, you get so locked into the habits
Yeah.
and the patterns of that, and and for both people, that at some point you have to say the only way that this is going to work is by me walking away, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the understanding that this is who we are as a unit. And we need to go find our healing and figure ourselves out and do something different the next time.
We create comfort zones.
Yes.
Right? Comfort zones aren't always so comfortable, but you know what to expect. And sometimes there are things about the person you really like, and you're afraid to let that go to find what missing on this end, right? But you know what to expect. Kind of like you're both saying, you're going to deal with the devil here or the new
out
devil,
there, right?
So I think we just get comfortable because we know what to expect. Even the things we don't like, we know what to expect.
Yeah. And the fear, like some people, financially they can't, it's not as easy for them to leave.
Right.
So that the fear
Right.
of, having to have a different lifestyle and, leveling down, maybe they might
Yeah.
feel like they're leveling
But
down.
dang, I look at that like, I mean, I've lived, as I was homeless as a kid,
Yeah,
okay?
I've
So
mastered struggle.
I've had nothing, but then I also had a very nice life as well. And I don't know, happiness for me supersedes any tangibles because I could just get it back. But if I feel trapped, it is it's not even worth everything you got, in my opinion. But I know it's easier said than
Yeah,
done. And I
because you're a
know,
woman that knows how to do it.
yeah, and I get it. And I understand all that.
Yeah.
So I want to go on to the next one. You don't like your partner. I have said this in my past. I love you so much, but I don't like you. And there is nothing worse than feeling like that to me. Because you love the person, but you're avoiding coming home. You don't really want to be around them. You don't want to have conversations with them because you don't feel like you can talk to them. And you genuinely feel like, I just don't like this person. So you want to kind of tap into that?
That's a deal breaker for me.
When do you pull the plug on that concept? Because there are times when you just don't like your person because you just don't like them, and then you fall in love with them all over again or whatever. But when do you know it's time to pull the plug?
Because at that point they've become like family, right? So you love them. We all got family members that we love and we don't really like.
Right.
We might have a brother or sister that we love and we don't really like that much. They just rub us the wrong way, but you love them and you do anything for them because they're family. And sometimes someone you're dating can become like that, or somebody you're married to can become like that. They're like family. It's hard to pull the plug. But family is different. You can never get rid of family. With relationships, I think sometimes you're afraid to pull the plug because you might not ever see them again, or it could just end the friendship. And a lot of times there is a friendship.
Is there a friendship if you don't like them?
Well, here's the thing. Sometimes you don't like them in the context of a relationship.
Gotcha.
There are women that are very, very close to me that I know if I was in a relationship with them, we wouldn't like each other anymore. But as friends, we're fine.
But what about when you're in the relationship and now you don't like the person that you once adored?
I think it's because you're in the relationship. If you just had a friendship with that person, you'd probably still be friends.
That's actually very true. And I can relate to that again. And I keep referencing my last relationship. But again, it's the most relevant. I hate to, because I don't want him to think that I'm just always bashing him. Right. But I can relate to that because he was the homie. That was the reason why it was so hard to really cut it off.
Right.
Because the thing that I really, really loved our friendship.
Right.
And we were like this as friends. We loved to do everything alike. Like we were thought alike in business. We loved to travel. We just had the same likes. So this was like the homie. Right. So it really sucked when romantically it was failing. Why are you laughing?
No, I was just thinking of the time we went to Lake Las Vegas and he was so happy that it was me and my guy arguing. He was like, I'll go get the ice cream.
He's like, it's not us this time, it's them. We were cracking up laughing. Anyways, no reminiscing.
Yeah, it was funny.
No reminiscing. I pulled the plug. Okay. So anyways, you were saying, Rodney?
That's what it is. There are certain people that you love to death.
Yeah.
They could be your very best friend. But if it went to the next level, it's troublesome because there are some things that you really connect on and other things that you don't. And you wouldn't even know it until you're in a relationship.
But my question is, how do you know when it's time to pull the plug when you have a relationship that now you don't like your partner?
That's the time.
Being honest with yourself.
But you cannot like your partner sometimes and then get over it.
I think you know when you really just just start everything they do, the way they smell starts to bother you. You know, like.
Is it just sometimes or is it most of the time? Is it an overall feeling of, I don't really want to come home, and I didn't want to come home last month either?
So I want to be a little bit more specific because these answers are very vague for me, and what I mean by that is like, do I not like this person because I'm not really honest with them about what it's really bothering me? Have I not really communicated?
Right.
Have I not created the boundaries or say this thing that you keep doing? Because so many people are so passive in their relationship because it's just like, he's not going to do it anyways, or she's not going to do it anyways. Right. And they make these assumptions and they have these expectations. And it's like, do you not like them because it's time and you just don't like them? Or do you not like them because you're not communicating and they're not meeting your expectations, but you're not sharing what your expectations are? And when do you know when I don't like you means it's time to pull the plug? What's the work you have to do to know that you have clarity in that answer?
I could tell you the moment I knew it was time to pull the plug.
Okay.
I remember my grandmother saying she divorced her husband because he didn't take out the trash. And I was like, you're crazy. Like, nobody gets divorced because they didn't take out the trash. And one night, it had been a few months. And this is such a stupid thing but I knew in that moment I was done.
Yeah.
And we have an HOA, so they're writing us letters. You got to cut the bushes. And I'm like, can you cut the bushes? There's 3 in the front yard. Can you cut them? For 2 months. Can you cut the bushes? Can you cut the bushes? So one night, I guess I came home and I was pissed off and I go off, cut the bushes, you know. So he goes outside with the I don't even know what it's called.
The hedge cutters or whatever.
Going like this, and he's cut. And I'm a hairstylist. I'm like, he's cutting them wrong. Like, they're gonna be ugly, right? And I had this sense of peace, and I just said, I'm done.
Bam.
And it literally was the straw. And I remembered what my grandmother said. And I'm like, I didn't feel heard. And I'm sure he didn't feel heard. And I'm not bashing because
But you're just sharing
I'm
your
just
experience.
sharing my
That's all.
experiences,
Yeah.
the moment, because I think we want to know the moment that it's
Right.
done. For me, that was the moment. And after that moment, there was other things that happened, and I stayed, and we probably tried to work on it another year or so.
Right.
But I knew in that moment
But
I was
it's that
done. I was done
leverage.
compromising.
There's leverage to everything, right? And it's that leverage is that breaking point. And I think that's how you know when it's time to pull the plug.
Mhm.
It's that moment when it's not the biggest things, but it's finally that small little thing that, again, it's cliche, the straw that breaks the camel's back.
There was no more compromise. There was
But
no
once
more.
but when you just
fighting
have
me
a
after that.
peace in your knowing, I'm done.
So peace in your knowing.
A big sign
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
I didn't want to have sex anymore.
Well, that's a man's perspective right there.
Right?
know.
I mean, I didn't feel connected
Sex
to her.
sandwich
Gotcha.
and shut
It-
up.
That's
it
actually
just-
strong
it
coming from
just-
a man.
yeah, it just,
No,
it
that's
just,
strong.
It just was like,
That's relevant.
you just called me a bunch of names, or we just had this wild. No, I just don't feel like connecting with you in that way. And lots of things start going out the window as far as intimacy. Like it felt like you're the enemy, or you're the opponent. She started to feel like an opponent to me,
Mm-hmm.
and intimacy was just out the window. That's why I was so surprised when
Yeah.
we had our daughter. But
If you do the do.
Yeah.
Immaculate conception.
So that was a big one. Just not wanting to be touched or any of that stuff.
That's good. I think that's what I love having even the men's perspective,
Mhm.
because that's something that women can pay attention to when they're in a relationship. People like to focus on the symptoms versus the problem. Oh, he thinks I'm gross, or he's not attracted to me, and he's not wanting to have sex with me. He doesn't, my husband or my significant other doesn't touch me anymore, whatever. And it's like, okay, that's the symptom. Is it that he's repulsed by you aesthetically, or is there just layers of things going on? And instead of assuming what's the problem,
Yeah.
people have to both be open and talk about what those problems are, right?
I was
Okay, so I'm gonna
married
go-
to a beautiful woman. It wasn't.
It wasn't that. Yeah. That's so good, right? I think that's really good. I actually, I really like that actually. Okay, the last bullet point is your partner is abusive. And I'm going to read a little tidbit. It's possible for people in abusive relationships to love an abusive partner. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have been victims of intimate partner violence, according to a survey, what have you. When it comes to abuse of any kind, this author says it's crucial to safely find a way out. It's difficult to get out of those relationships, especially when you really have love. When you really have love for the person. And for me, I remember I grew up in a very violent home. There was a lot of domestic violence in my home growing up, and it was really rough and it was really hard. And I seen some really horrific things. And I remember telling myself, when I get older, that's not going to be my life. And I found myself in an abusive relationship. And the dynamic, because the thing that frustrated me growing up as a child was like, why doesn't my mom just go? Why won't she just leave? Why are we still here? And I didn't understand. I didn't have the cognitive ability to understand the dynamics and the manipulation and the belittling and how people get trapped in abusive relationships until I became that person. And because I had such a strong personality, it was something also that I kept in silence. I didn't share it. People didn't know. It was a secret, right? Because Lorraine, this strong woman, is not going to express or tell people that she's being abused. And the funny thing was, part of me not wanting to tell people was because I was protecting the abuser. I didn't want anyone to look at that person in a bad way. And the thing about those type of relationships, the toxicity that's involved in that, whether it is verbal and mental abuse or physical abuse, is that the dynamics of the highs and lows are so incredibly strong. So you'll have the abuse take place, and then the person become afraid that you're going to leave them, and then beg and plead and promise you the sun, the moon, the stars, and rope you back in. So they shrink you down, then they build you back up. and then they shrink you down and you build you back up. And because I have such a strong personality myself, there were times that I participated in the abuse, right? So it was like, I'm not going to just sit there and let you be abusive towards me. I'm going to go right there with you. And then I became abusive. And so it was that push and pull in that. And now I feel guilty. They feel guilty. And let's just be together. And it was such a hard thing to overcome and to get away from, and to not be ashamed, and to be able to have a voice behind it and just be like, enough. But it took so much of my own self-worth and self-love and a lot of work. I couldn't read a book and get it done. I had to go see counselors, and I had to do workshops, and I had to get real healing while I was still in that relationship and doing it secretly, in order for me to finally have the courage to say, this is unacceptable. And the sad thing about it is I accepted it for so long. I'm sorry, I'm rambling about this, but I'm very passionate about this. I accepted it for so long because the reality was it was incredibly familiar. The thing that I resisted and I said I'll never have, it just felt like home to be in abuse, because that's all I knew growing up. And having to understand that dynamic, and in order to free me from that, I swear to you, even any type of aggression from a man now, or any type of whatever, it's like, nope, I'm not doing it. And I had to recently come to that conclusion for my life.
You said something very interesting that most people don't say or admit. You admitted your participation in that atmosphere, in that environment that was created. And what happens is there's shame to it.
Right.
Because you knew that you were a part of it, right? Because it was just the kind of back and forth. And a man is always going to be bigger and stronger and do the worst things. But the shame that comes a lot of times is because you knew that there was a environment that was, because I was in the same thing where we'd get these really nasty arguments. I was young, we were both young, and the cops came a couple of times because we were yelling and screaming, and the neighbors called the cops, right? Because we were just being out of hand, just screaming at each other. And there's shame in that.
Right.
We both would be so ashamed that the neighbors called the cops because we were so loud. We were screaming at each other so loud and banging dishes and, madness. A lot of times that's what happens, is you stay because you're together in this shame.
Right.
And you don't want anybody to know, because regardless of who did what, you both were participating in it and you know it. A lot of times it's like, why don't you just leave, if he was doing that?
Another big thing, not to interrupt you, is you feel like you deserve it.
Right.
You get caught up in the fact that the abuse is punishment for something you did wrong, and you start to believe that.
Right.
And if you feel like you're wrong, and if I wouldn't have, I remember in that the book, and I tell you what I wrote in there. One of the things that I wrote, which was really like a gut check for me when I was referencing something I wrote earlier, I was reading and it said, I was literally writing this, what can I do better? If I just talk to him this way, would that change his approach with me? Maybe if I do this and do that, maybe if I do, and I literally it's me blaming. I was being over accountable and really trying to figure out, it's got to be me that's making him treat me like this.
Mm-hmm.
I have a where it was an unfamiliar thing for me. I never witnessed abuse in my home, or I've never been in an abusive relationship. And it was so unfamiliar that I was like, what did I do wrong? Why would somebody, because I didn't understand why somebody would be like so manipulative, and, that whole narcissistic.
The emotional abuse, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, but on one hand, this part of it was great. And on the other hand, it was like, always like, everything can be great. And then it just went south. And it's like, I would always be over accountable. Like, what did I do wrong?
Right.
And but it just, it's funny how it's like a opposite, because I was so unfamiliar
Right.
with it. I didn't know how to recognize that that was just toxic.
And again, we talked about this last week. It's like, there's red flags that you know, but then there's red flags that you don't know. An abusive person that meets a person who's never been around abuse at all can really manipulate them. And I'm not talking necessarily about physical,
no
violent
physical
abuse. I'm talking about the mental abuse that some people do to one another, men and women, when we talk about that. So the answer to that one is, when is it time to pull the plug? Immediately. If there is abuse, I don't, and I, to anybody out there, I promise you, if there is abuse in a relationship, if a person lacks control and they are abusive, I don't care how many times they promise you the sun, the moon, the stars, you got to get out. You have to leave. You just have to, because they're going to do it again. And then they need to do work. Listen, the abuser has issues that, hurting people hurt people. And abusers that don't want to acknowledge that they are out of control and they lose control, whether they're manipulating or whether they're physically abusing you, and they're not willing to acknowledge that and go get help. And by the way, if they say, oh, I'm going to go get help, they need to go get help, not because you're going to leave. They need to get help because they recognize they need help. And you need to leave them anyways and let them go get their help on their own and move on with your life and go get your help too. That's all I have to say about that.
One thing to remember is some relationships are just combustible.
Yes.
These two people will create a dynamic that won't happen with somebody else. Like I told you, when I was married young and we fought loud. Like I'm so ashamed today thinking of how we used to be. And I'll hear a couple fighting sometimes and I'm like, that's unacceptable. Then I'm like, God, we used to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anybody who has dated me since my marriage does not see me like that at all. Is shocked to say, yeah, I used to punch holes in the wall. I used to be so mad I would punch holes in the drywall. Every house I had when I was married, I punched a hole in the drywall at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that's with me now go, you? Really?
Well, that's your growth.
But it's not just that. It's two combustible people.
Okay, gotcha.
That should not have been together. And sometimes that is what it is. It's just people who should not be together because sometimes no one's listening. In some relationships, two people demanding that they're right, that don't back down, that don't listen. And it is growth.
Right.
But there are some relationships that can be very fiery, passionate. And that's another one.
Mm-hmm.
When people have passionate, great sex and all of that, and that combustible thing that's great there is a negative somewhere else.
Right.
And sometimes people won't, and I know a lot of women that won't leave relationships because the passion is there.
Right, because they're confusing that for love.
Right.
Lust first.
So a lot of times it's like just knowing that the two of us are not good.
The biggest epiphany because we've referenced, you want to deal with the devil you have or the devil you don't have. And one of the epiphanies I had to come to a conclusion was because the rationalization, the story that I kept playing back and forth in my mind was this. This person's good with this and great with this and this and that, and he's so loyal and he's so these other amazing things. I don't really want to go out there and meet someone who won't give me these things. And then that epiphany hit me. I'm basically telling myself that this is as good as it's ever going to get for my life.
Yeah.
Right.
And I had to ask myself, but why is that a choice? Why am I making that decision that this is as good as it's going to get? Why is that the bar that I've set? Not to take away from this person by no means and how good they were when they were good. But why can't I have it without the but?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So then I said to myself, if this is the bar, let me just raise the standard for myself, how I love myself, how I value myself, how I see myself, and what I will tolerate in my life. And let me just trust that I can go out there in the world and project that because I believe it now.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so that was the conclusion. And that was how I finally was able to say, okay, it's time to pull the plug here, because 6 years later, this is where we are. And nothing against him, nothing against me, but I can walk away and say, but I think that there's something better for me. And by the way, for him too, because to your point, just the two of us dynamically together, we're combustible. We're great here, but So I want to conclude. We're closing. Pull the plug. Final thoughts on pulling the plug. I think this actually was really good. I think it was pretty rich, but I always think that because it's very biased. It's the show I'm doing, so every show's good. But if we can just do a little round robin, we love to do that and kind of close. Maybe I'll let you close, say the last thought, Rodney. If you I'll have Carmen tell her piece, and then I want you to kind of close with what you have to say, if that's cool, because I think you'll be that nice little to the end. So Carmen, what is your final thoughts on when to pull the plug, when to just let it go?
When you're compromising your beliefs and how you see your life to be, being honest with yourself, just knowing that, like you said, setting the standard for your life. And if it's not fitting, then it's just not going to fit. And if the person is willing and you're ready to go, they're gonna do what it takes to make it right. So just there's 7 billion people in the world. Like,
Right.
just get over it. You'll get over it.
Yeah. I would have to say, and thinking about this, I would say that when you know that your fears are outweighing the love and that your reasons for staying is more based on fear than your reasons for staying based on the fact that you love this person. I think that you have to kind of what you're saying, you have to check in with who you are and work on yourself. And I think the more you work on yourself while you're in the relationship, it'll naturally either come together because as you start to love yourself, you project and you just, the lens
Yeah.
shifts when you love yourself. So when I say stay in it and work on yourself. You don't have to be, unless it's abusive, but stay in it, work on yourself. And as you work on yourself and love yourself, the knowing inside of you will be a peaceful feeling. You'll just know. And the decision won't be so difficult when you're loving yourself. So Rodney, take us home.
I use this. I imagine myself old, 80 years old, sitting on a park bench next to a lake. Then I ask myself, is this the person I'd want sitting with me?
Ooh, I like
When
that.
all we've got to do is spend time and talk.
Mm-hmm.
When all the excitement is done. When, certain parts of your body don't really work that well anymore. When all those things are behind you, is this the person I want by my side?
I love that.
And if
Yeah.
I can't see it being that person, it's the wrong person.
I think that was well
was
said. And I don't
wonderful.
even think there's anything left to say.
Drop the mic.
Mhm.
Boom. So thank you all again for watching another episode. Again, this is the Mindsetters. We are talking about stuff to get you to think of things differently because again, when we believe here that if you can change your mind, you have the power to truly change your life. So thank you for watching. Until next time. Bye. 1.0.